Welcome to the show, everybody. Michael with CoronavirusDiaries, and today I'm able to speak again with Linsey Williams, a non-commissioned officer with the Public Affairs Office in the Minnesota Army National Guard. Linsey, how are you?
I'm doing well, Micah. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for spending some time. The last time we connected, it's been a little while. You were in the process of getting a home, which is now behind you. Super stoked to hear a little bit about that. But before we started, we touched base a little bit on another conversation we had that was kind of just, a tertiary discussion on martial law. And it was specific to like COVID and maybe people not adhering to lockdowns. And then riots happened in lieu of the murder of George Floyd, which happened in South Minneapolis, pending investigation and a legal process. Minneapolis basically became the epicenter of what many are calling the largest civil rights movement in recorded history. I'm curious to hear what happened with you because being as you are in the Minnesota Army National Guard, I know they deployed throughout Minnesota and specifically here in the Twin Cities. Just curious, what can you share? What happened when it all went down for you?
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because, soldiers came and were called in waves. So that Thursday night when things really started to go south and,
The police
government
department got
officials
burned that
and
night, third precinct.
and law enforcement realized they were going to need help. Between the governor and the adjutant general, they kind of came to the decision that we should activate everybody. So there were 4 units. I couldn't say exactly off the top of my head, but there were 4 units who were initially and immediately called, and they kind of assisted law enforcement at the scene. They assisted fire at the scene, and they were basically just there to help with control and support and all of those things. And so that was kind of their role. And then as the days progressed, more soldiers were available, and they were, kind of divvied out to go to certain places. So those first couple of days, it was really kind of crazy. So that Saturday night, I reported and in processed and all that, and then I spent the whole night with one unit who was kind of on standby, and then we went out in the middle of the night, and we were kind of making the rounds with some soldiers who had been deployed to the Minneapolis Convention Center. And then by morning, we were at the Federal Reserve. So at that point, the decision had been made that we're going to take the units available to us and, just protect critical infrastructure. So throughout Minneapolis and St. Paul, we had soldiers doing that mission. As you know, we had soldiers at the Capitol, we had soldiers at Sheriff's Department. I mean, there's a whole list of places.
Critical infrastructure.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So they're there to protect people and property, and that was really our role. We weren't a law enforcement force unless we were requested to work side by side with law enforcement. And those are particular units, as it is, who are trained in such a thing. So, we were mostly a protective role, and I'm proud of our soldiers for what they did. That was a crazy mission, but also I think it's very personal to everyone in the Minnesota National Guard because this is home for a lot of troops as well. So, I spoke to one soldier who, he was managing a shop that got burned up one night. He was there when they started looting, and then the next night it got burned, and then, within hours he was called up to duty. And that's an incredible thing to just be able to shift gears and just go and put everything on hold. It says a lot. So they were hard at work, sleeping shifts. There's been a photo circulating of troops sleeping outside of.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
That's okay. We'll shift. It's going to be weird.
It works. We're getting a little tour.
Yeah. Watch the dog come over here.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you got the experience of a local deployment during civil unrest, which the National Guard is, that's what the last conversation we had was, protecting, serving community. there's a lot of discussion now over defunding or disbanding the Minneapolis Police Department and transitioning to like a community policing model that's been done in other communities. And in many ways I see it, and I think about when I had done private security myself and how it's just different, right? Because you're held to different standards. But if you're from that community, how it could be really beneficial. But if you're from there, you're held accountable for everything, and it's community-based policing. But you had mentioned there's national training coming up. What can you share about that? For anybody that's not familiar, viewers, listeners, the National Training Center is a place out west where there's a massive mobilization of a bunch of units, or is it like maybe an entire brigade or more, multiple different, we'll just say, teams of people that will come together, operate on a very large scale, and kind of work out any bugs that there might be in operating at that large of a scale, which can be very, very beneficial for an actual deployment like what just happened.
Yes.
So curious, what's going on with the National Training Center?
Yeah, so I mean, you laid it out really well. Our 1st Armored Brigade Combat Team is slated to go to the National Training Center. Now, this is something that happens every 4 or 5 years. We have a National Guard Brigade that goes out there, and they do their training. They take all of their equipment, they take all of their essential personnel, and they validate and train and make sure that they are ready to deploy in an overseas environment. And so because the 1st Armored Brigade Combat Team is scheduled to go on a federal overseas deployment, this is one of those validating tasks. And it's been on the books for a while, and a lot of mitigation measures have gone into making sure that troops are safe with regard to coronavirus and all of those things. And so the powers that be don't intend to cancel the training. And there have been a lot of, upset wives and family members, just because, there's going to have to be time extended to the rotation itself, just to ensure that, if we need to quarantine someone, they'll have the time available to them. But, we're not totally heartless. There are some people, if you have someone who's immunocompromised in your domicile, then maybe that's something that can get worked out. There's a lot going on with that, but some people just say, well, our soldiers are fatigued and they're tired and there's a lot going on, and we understand that, but it doesn't change the fact that there's a mission. Yeah. And
I'm curious, I'm really curious in regards to the recent deployment here in the cities for the riots. I never saw a single soldier, National Guardsman, with a mask on. And I'm wondering, how is that, like, when civilians are being required to wear them in community, going indoors, they're being asked to wear them in public, social distancing. I saw large troop movements and throughout either Minneapolis or St. Paul, regardless where they're at, that nobody had a mask on. Is there anything you could share with that in terms of just readiness and mobilizing and coronavirus or COVID-19?
Yeah, so as troops started coming in and coming on duty at some of our locations, we were able to secure temperature checks and hand out masks, but not at every armory that troops had to report to. And we all knew that we were getting tested for COVID-19 before we left active duty.
Oh, got a little lag. Oh, we're back.
Okay. And so we absolutely had to just kind of Charlie Mike with the mission. So we moved forward and did the mission. And then as we realized things were slowing down, the order was shared with everyone, and we had to make sure that everyone did have a mask. But for all of the public facing missions, guarding hospitals and things like that, everyone would be masked up. And so kind of towards the tail end, everyone was able to, get the supplies they needed to do that. But for the most part, there were a lot of standing outside, so and doing their guard duty. So it wasn't as critical, but yeah, we just, yeah, we did the best we could with what we had and the crazy timeline we were working with.
And you had mentioned a hospital. I had just spoken with a healthcare professional that's from a hospital here in the Twin Cities, and she had mentioned that there were security missions for at least some of the places she was aware of. Did you know anybody yourself that went to these hospitals, and kind of what must that have been like? I can only imagine myself to be guarding a hospital within your own community from rioters.
You know, I'll tell you what, I don't know what it was like kind of those first couple days, but then as Monday, Tuesday, and we still had the curfews in effect, I think went till Thursday. So there were times where I was out at, 2, 3 in the morning, kind of making the rounds and seeing what was going on at some of the locations, and seeing Minneapolis in the way that it was, and seeing, MRAPs in front of police stations, and police stations that are bricked off and surrounded by C-wire. It was so strange.
Right.
But the troops seemed to be in fairly good spirits. They understood what they were there for, but it was just different. But I think they enjoyed being able to engage with the folks that they were serving, the folks in the community. I know down I think it was on Cedar, and I don't remember the cross street, the Cedar Food and Grill. The troops really got to engage with the locals down there, and they were welcomed, and it was nice. And the fact that we can engage without too much hostility was really nice. It felt like we were kind of a bridge between the two forces we were serving.
You talk about this, professional soldier, right? These professional soldiers. We just talked about National Training Center and a big movement, like really heavily involved. You're getting ready to go on one of your own regular training exercises during the summer for an extended period of time. The amount of training, I was in a conversation with somebody recently that, they have their own opinions and beliefs on law enforcement and excessive force, and rightfully so. But we got into the discussion between how their views towards the military, the National Guard specifically, Minnesota that deployed, and how they saw them as, they didn't see them as a threat so much as like people that were in the community to help stabilize things. Whereas the law enforcement, they were still concerned that there was this, maybe just a lack of training and this hasty, like just a different type of decision making. You mind sharing your thoughts on like being a professional soldier, the training that's involved, the just kind of a decision making process, and how things play out when you're on a deployment or when you're out there doing that stuff?
Yeah, well, when it comes to everything that we do, there's protocols and there's rules for how we do it. And without getting into the rules themselves, those are things that are really drilled into all of our activities. And it comes down to making sure that the leaders give their troops, the right kind of guidance, and know what their mission is, and really don't deviate unless you have to. But thankfully, we never really had to. So we're given a task and carried it out really well. And I think that's just the big thing. It was interesting because a lot of these troops,
Oh, you got a little lag. Well, it'll come back. There it is.
Yeah. So for a lot of these guys, security isn't their occupational specialty. So you're given a task, and that's the task. You don't deviate from that. And so kind of simplifying the mission, I think, helps, versus, someone like a police force. They get called into doing all kinds of different things, whether it be from a criminal effect to a mental health issue to a loose dog to a medical event. I mean, that's a whole myriad of different things to respond to.
Sure.
So I think that really changes things.
Yeah, I agree. That's one of the talking points that has continually come up in conversation with my own network is the spectrum that law enforcement is asked to manage, and then also the extent of training that they're getting, and the types of training. All relevant things to have to look into moving forward, without getting too far into the politics of it. I know right now in Minnesota, I mean, it's kind of bizarre having friends that are overseas that are hitting me up saying, "Yo, you live in Minneapolis. Tell me what's going on the ground there." And I'm just like, dude, I don't even know where to start. I'm like, how do I talk to you about this without like going in 12 different directions? So, great. Well, so can you explain a little bit for folks that don't know, and then I'll let you get going. I know you're a busy woman, you got a new house and everything. As far as the training goes, right? You're getting ready to go into your annual training,
Hmm.
and you got a couple of weeks where you're going to focus on your specific military occupation specialty.
Hmm.
What do you focus on? Like, what do you anticipate to focus on this year?
So this year I was actually at Camp Ripley earlier this week, and I saw it's full up there with all of I mean, there's a whole brigade of soldiers getting ready to go to the National Training Center, and they're sending all of their equipment as well. So rail operations start at Camp Ripley, and that's where they go all the way to Fort
Yeah.
Irwin, California. So those will be starting, and I know Serving Our Troops, amazing organization since 2004. They've been serving home cooked steaks
Oh,
to troops. They've gone overseas, they've done it here, and so they're just wonderful. So they'll be doing an event, and so I'll be supporting that as well. But I'm going to spend a lot of time just kind of documenting what our soldiers are doing, and how they're doing it, and yeah, just kind of sharing their story.
so when you say documenting, are you running around with a team with video cameras and drones and doing all that? Like, what does that entail?
It'd be great if we had drones. That might actually look really cool for the rail apps, but
Look
I'm gonna put
amazing.
a pin in that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'll run around with probably an SLR, and then I'll set up and run a video camera for the Serving Our Troops event and things like that. So taking photos, taking video, and yeah, just kind of doing all that good stuff.
Great. And so I want to take a couple back steps really quick.
Hmm.
So your specialty, your military occupation specialty is in public affairs, and you're talking about running around with a camera.
Hmm.
Now, when you deployed though, local deployment, you were tasked with security, right?
I was not. I was still doing the public affairs gig.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Very cool.
Yep. Yep.
All right. So when you were doing the rounds, you were going around engaging with other soldiers and just kind of documenting the events that were taking place.
Yep.
Did they, and I don't know if we can talk, were you armed?
I was not.
Okay, so you're almost in the position of like what a medic would be in or something along those
Kinda.
lines. I mean,
Sure.
in a support role as opposed
Yeah.
to, how did that feel being, I mean,
The first couple nights, we wore the battle rattle and made sure we were safe. And then after a few nights, we realized how quiet it was, and we didn't feel that we were as in danger. So without being armed, we didn't wear the gear as much. So that was kind of nice.
yeah, there's some pretty heavy duty stuff going on in South there for a little bit. I have some friends in the security industry, and I was seeing photos of IEDs in the, yeah, there was some stuff in Longfellow that was documented, some vehicles recovered with some stuff inside of them. And actually when I was in St. Paul, I was trying to connect with a protest. There's a big unit deployed there. Probably an entire company was deployed along the city, I think it was by the city courthouse. There's a car with no license plate, and the military, they kind of set up a cordon. They were checking it out because these vehicles with no plates had been used for nefarious activities, but thankfully it turned out not to be anything. But yeah, there's definitely some heated exchanges and some interesting activities. I'm glad that you are well, and that everybody else from Minnesota as well. I didn't hear of any injuries. Did you hear of any kind of stuff that happened?
I mean, as far as our people were concerned, it was, as far as I know, they're all unscathed. I haven't heard of anything, so that's good.
Maybe just some heat exhaustion, huh?
Yeah, that might be it.
Right on. Well, okay, so and then really quick, your house. So you're in, and you were talking about how the transition, because this is something else that we've been kind of tracking along. You
Yeah.
finally got the transition, but you transitioned into this property in the middle of pandemic riots. How was the transition into being a first-time homeowner during a pandemic riot?
So it was Saturday the 30th that I did the U-Haul thing, got everything here, and that was the same night that I reported for active duty. So I was up all night working and got home at maybe 9 a.m. the next day. So Sunday morning I get home, and then I was on the night shift for the whole week. So it wasn't until the following Saturday, this past Saturday, that I spent my first night in the house. And it was the best. Even last night, I went to parts of the house. Like I was like, I don't think I've been upstairs at night yet. So just like familiarizing myself, and it's great. It's so quiet. It's peaceful. It's really a nice neighborhood, and I'm happy to be here. And I'm happy to start putting roots down here in Minnesota.
Outstanding. Well, it's good to have you in the community and in Minnesota National Guard. For any of viewers, listeners, you just heard it from the mouth of somebody that's living it. Is if you're a civilian soldier and National Guard's personnel, that's that's the stuff you get to look forward to. Is whether or not it's being deployed for emergency response during floods or fires or pandemic riots. You just got to shift your role and you got to make it happen. And it doesn't matter if you're in the middle of buying a house, it's what you got to do. Thankfully, you're well trained. Linsey, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Yeah, thank you, Micah.
Yeah, and for all the viewers, listeners, information will be down below if you're looking to get involved with the Minnesota National Guard. Until next time, stick around. We got more coming at you.